The blood wouldn't stop flowing from Daniel Kensington's palm as he stumbled through the hospital's automatic doors, the emergency lighting casting eerie shadows across his torn designer suit and shattered pride. The citywide power outage had plunged Manhattan into chaos 3 hours ago, and in that darkness, everything Daniel thought he controlled had unraveled in minutes. His Rolex caught the flickering light as he pressed his wounded hand against his chest, leaving crimson stains on his white shirt. The emergency generators hummed overhead, casting the hospital lobby in an amber glow that made everything feel surreal, apocalyptic. Voices echoed from different directions, nurses calling out instructions, patients moaning, phones ringing incessantly. Daniel had built an empire worth $3.8 billion by never showing weakness, never needing anyone. Tonight, bleeding and disoriented in a powerless city, he felt more vulnerable than he had since he was 7 years old and abandoned at a group home. "Sir, are you hurt?" The voice stopped him mid-step, soft, melodic, with an accent that spoke of Louisiana roots and careful education. Daniel turned toward the sound and found himself looking into the most beautiful golden eyes he'd ever seen. She couldn't have been more than 29, with rich mahogany skin that seemed to glow even in the dim emergency lighting. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, revealing the elegant curve of her neck. She wore scrubs that had seen better days and tennis shoes that were practically worn through, but she carried herself with a dignity that caught him off guard. "I'm fine," he said automatically, the lie he'd been telling himself for 31 years. Her gaze dropped to his bleeding palm, then back to his face. She saw right through him, saw past the expensive suit and the carefully constructed walls he'd spent decades building. "No, you're not." She stepped closer, and Daniel caught a scent that made his chest constrict. Lavender and something else, something warm and comforting that reminded him of safety, of home, concepts he'd almost forgotten existed. "I'm Chloe," she said, reaching for his injured hand without hesitation. "Let me help you." The moment she touched his palm, Daniel's world shifted. Her hands were gentle but sure, warm against his cold skin. She cradled his wounded hand like it was something precious, not the tool he used to crush business rivals and build his empire. "This needs cleaning," she murmured, examining the jagged cut that ran from his thumb to his wrist. "What happened?" Daniel stared down at her bent head, watching the emergency lighting play across her features. When was the last time someone had touched him with tenderness instead of calculation? When was the last time someone had looked at him and seen a person instead of a bank account? "I was walking to my car when the lights went out," he heard himself saying. "Someone grabbed my briefcase, pushed me into an alley. I fell against some broken glass." The truth was more complicated. He'd been leaving his office at midnight, again, avoiding the penthouse that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. When the power failed, his driver couldn't get through the traffic chaos, so Daniel had started walking. In the darkness, he'd looked like just another businessman, and the mugger had seen easy prey. For the first time in his adult life, Daniel Kensington had been just another victim. "Come on," Chloe said, her hand slipping under his elbow to guide him. "There's a supply closet down the hall. I volunteer here sometimes. I know where everything is." She led him through corridors lit only by emergency strips, past families huddled together on benches, past nurses moving with practiced efficiency despite the chaos. Her touch on his arm was light but steady, grounding him in a way that surprised him. The supply closet was small, barely large enough for 2 people. Chloe flicked on a battery-powered lantern, bathing them both in warm light. In the intimate glow, Daniel could see the exhaustion around her eyes, the way her scrubs hung loose on her frame as if she'd lost weight recently. "Sit," she said, indicating a small stool. "This might sting." Daniel lowered himself onto the stool, acutely aware of how close she was as she gathered supplies. When she knelt beside him and took his hand again, something in his chest cracked open. "You have strong hands," she said, cleaning the wound with precision. "Do you work with them?" The question almost made him laugh. His hands had signed billion-dollar deals, typed hostile takeover strategies, built an empire that employed thousands. But the way she asked it with genuine curiosity and no recognition of who he was, made him pause. "You could say that," he said, quietly. She looked up at him then, really looked, and Daniel felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with his torn clothes. "You're not from around here," she observed. It wasn't a question. "What makes you say that?" "Your accent, old money, private schools, but there's something else underneath." Her fingers worked carefully, applying antibiotic ointment. "Pain, maybe. Loss." Daniel was startled by her perceptiveness. In 30 seconds, this woman had seen more of him than business associates who'd known him for years. "You're very observant," he said. "I work with people who've lost everything," she said simply. "You learn to see past the surface. And what do you see when you look at me?" Chloe's hand stilled on his. She tilted her head, studying his face in the lantern light. "Someone who's been alone for a long time," she said softly. "Someone who's forgotten what kindness feels like." The words hit him like a physical blow. His mask was slipping. The walls he'd built were crumbling under her gentle touch and perceptive gaze. "Why are you helping me?" he whispered. "Because you need help," she said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "And because everyone deserves to be treated with kindness, no matter who they are or where they come from." She finished bandaging his hand, her fingers lingering on his wrist. Daniel could feel his pulse hammering against her touch, could see the flutter of her own heartbeat at the base of her throat. "There," she said, but she didn't pull away. "That should hold until you can see a proper doctor." "Thank you," Daniel said, his voice rougher than he intended. "I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to repay kindness," Chloe said. "That's what makes it kindness." They stared at each other in the flickering lantern light, two strangers thrown together by chaos and darkness. Daniel sensed something awakening in his chest, something he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed. "Hope. I should go," he said, though every fiber of his being wanted to stay in this small room where he felt more human than he had in years. "Of course," Chloe said, but her expression showed disappointment. "Be careful out there. The streets are still dangerous with the power out." Daniel stood, immediately missing the warmth of her presence. At the door he turned back. "Chloe," he said, her name feeling strange and wonderful on his tongue. "If I wanted to find you again." She smiled, and the expression transformed her entire face. "I volunteer here Tuesdays and Thursdays. The shelter on 5th Street Wednesdays and Saturdays." "The shelter on 5th Street," Daniel repeated, memorizing every word. "Good night, Daniel," she said. He paused, his hand on the doorframe. He hadn't told her his name. "How did you—" "Your watch," she said, gesturing to his Rolex. "It's engraved." Daniel looked down at the watch his board had given him when Kensington Industries went public. Daniel Kensington, visionary leader, in tiny script he'd forgotten was there. But when he looked back up, Chloe's expression hadn't changed. She wasn't looking at him differently, wasn't calculating his net worth, or wondering what he could do for her. She was still looking at him like he was just a man who'd needed help. "Good night, Chloe," he said. Daniel walked back through the hospital corridors, his bandaged hand throbbing with each heartbeat. The emergency lighting seemed brighter now, the chaos less overwhelming. Outside, the city was still dark, still dangerous, but something had shifted. For the first time in 24 years, Daniel Kensington felt like he'd found something worth more than money. He pulled out his phone to call his driver, then stopped. The screen showed 17 missed calls from his assistant, 43 unread emails, 12 text messages about the power grid failure and its impact on the markets. Daniel turned off his phone. He walked the 26 blocks to his penthouse in darkness, his bandaged hand a constant reminder of warm touch and gentle care. When he finally reached his building, the backup generators had restored minimal lighting to the lobby. The doorman looked shocked to see him disheveled and bleeding, but Daniel barely noticed. He rode the elevator to the 42nd floor in silence, his reflection in the polished steel doors showing a man he barely recognized. In his penthouse, Daniel stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a powerless Manhattan. Somewhere in that darkness was a woman who'd shown him kindness without expecting anything in return, a woman who'd seen past his wealth to the wounded man underneath, a woman whose name was Chloe, who volunteered at shelters, who had hands that could heal more than physical wounds. Daniel touched the bandage on his palm and made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow he would find her. He had no idea that 3 blocks away, Chloe Hope Matthews was lying awake in her tiny studio apartment, her own hands still tingling from the memory of touching his skin, her mind racing with thoughts of his eyes and a smile that had looked like sunrise after a long, dark night. She had no idea that the man she'd helped was one of the richest men in the city. And she had no idea that her simple act of kindness had just melted the defensive barriers around a heart that had been frozen for decades. The power outage would be fixed by morning, but the connection between them would prove far more difficult to repair. Daniel Kensington had never set foot in a homeless shelter in his life, but 3 days after the power outage, he found himself standing across the street from the 5th Street Community Center, watching through the windows as Chloe moved between tables serving lunch. She wore the same worn jeans and faded sweater he'd seen her in at the hospital, but in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the shelter's windows, she looked radiant. Her hair was down today, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and when she laughed at something an elderly man said, Daniel felt warmth unfurl in his chest. He'd spent the last 72 hours trying to forget her. He'd thrown himself into work, closed 2 major deals, and attended a charity gala where 3 different socialites had made it clear they were available. None of it had worked. Every time he looked at his bandaged palm, he felt her tender touch, heard her soft voice saying his name. Daniel checked his watch, a different one. He'd noticed the engraving on the Rolex made him feel exposed, and crossed the street. The shelter's lobby smelled like industrial disinfectant and cafeteria food, but underneath that was something warmer. Hope, maybe. Community. Can I help you? A woman behind the front desk looked up at him with surprise. His custom suit and Italian leather shoes clearly marked him as someone who didn't belong here. I'm looking for Chloe Matthews, Daniel said. I wanted to thank her for something. The woman's expression softened. Chloe's in the kitchen. She's been here since 6 this morning, preparing lunch for everyone. Just follow the hallway back. Daniel made his way through corridors lined with bulletin boards covered in job postings, health clinic schedules, and children's artwork. The sounds grew louder as he approached the kitchen. Laughter, conversation, the clatter of serving spoons against metal pans. He paused in the doorway, watching Chloe work. She was ladling soup into bowls with practiced efficiency, but she took time to speak to each person who came through the line. A word of encouragement here, a reassuring touch on the shoulder there. She treated everyone with the same dignity, the same respect. Chloe, an older black woman beside her said, "You've got a visitor." Chloe looked up, and when her gaze met Daniel's across the kitchen, her face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Daniel," she said, setting down the ladle. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to thank you properly," he said, stepping into the kitchen, "for the other night." Several volunteers had stopped working to stare at him. Daniel was acutely aware of how out of place he looked, but Chloe's smile made him feel welcome. "You didn't need to come all the way down here," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "How's your hand?" "Much better, thanks to you." Daniel held up his palm, now sporting a much smaller bandage. "I also wanted to ask if you have dinner with me, to properly thank you." The kitchen had gone quiet. Chloe glanced around at the watching faces, then back at Daniel. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully, "but I'm not finished here. We serve until 3, then there's cleanup." "I'll help," Daniel said without thinking. The words surprised everyone in the kitchen, including himself. But looking at Chloe's shocked expression, Daniel realized he meant it. "You want to help serve food?" she asked. "Why not?" Chloe studied his face for a long moment, then smiled, the same expression that had captivated him 3 nights ago. "All right," she said, "but you'll need to lose the jacket and tie and roll up your sleeves." Daniel shed his suit jacket and loosened his tie, acutely aware of Chloe watching him. When he rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle from his college rowing days, He caught her quick intake of breath. "Helen," Chloe called to the older woman. "This is Daniel. He's volunteering today." Helen looked skeptical but handed Daniel an apron. "You ever done this before, son? Because these folks can spot a fake from across the room, and they appreciate genuine effort." "No, ma'am," Daniel admitted. "Well, Chloe will teach you. She's got the patience of a saint." Helen's eyes crinkled with amusement. "She'll need it." For the next 2 hours, Daniel ladled soup, sliced bread, and carried trays to tables. His movements were awkward at first, but Chloe stayed close, guiding him with gentle touches that sent electricity through his skin. "Not so full," she said, her hand covering his on the ladle. "We need to make sure there's enough for everyone." Her touch lingered longer than necessary, and his pulse jumped. When she looked up at him, her expression held warmth that made his throat tighten. "Like this?" he asked, though he was pretty sure he'd gotten it right the first time. "Perfect," she whispered. They worked in comfortable synchronization, and Daniel found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. No one here cared about his net worth or his business empire. They saw him as just another volunteer, someone willing to help. "You're good at this," Chloe said during a brief lull. They were standing side by side, refilling serving containers. "It's not exactly rocket science," Daniel said. "No, I mean really good at it. You listen when people talk to you. You look them in the eye. A lot of volunteers." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "They mean well, but they see the situation instead of the person." Daniel glanced around the dining area, watching the faces of the people they were serving. Each one had a story, struggles, dreams that had been derailed by circumstances beyond their control. "I know what it's like to have nothing," he admitted. Chloe turned to study his profile. "Do you?" "I grew up in foster care," Daniel admitted. It was something he'd never told anyone in his professional life. A secret he'd buried under expensive clothes and careful speech patterns. Aged out at 18 with $200 and a bus ticket. "And now?" Chloe asked softly. "Now I have more money than I know what to do with," Daniel said. "But some days I still feel like that 18-year-old kid with nothing but a bus ticket." Chloe's hand found his arm, her touch kind and understanding. "Money doesn't heal those kinds of wounds," she said. "No," Daniel agreed, looking down at her. "It doesn't." Their eyes met and held. The noise of the dining room faded into background as Daniel felt himself falling into those amber depths. Chloe's lips parted slightly, and he found himself leaning closer. "Chloe," a man's voice shattered the moment. "We need more bread in the dining room." They sprang apart, both breathing harder than they should have been. Chloe's cheeks were flushed, and Daniel had to clench his hands to stop himself from reaching for her. "Coming, Marcus," Chloe called, her voice slightly unsteady. The rest of the service passed in a haze of stolen glances and accidental touches. When the last guest had been served and the kitchen was clean, Daniel found himself reluctant to leave. "Thank you," Chloe said, as they walked toward the front entrance together. "You were amazing today, really." "Thank you for letting me help," Daniel said. "I can't remember the last time I felt so useful," Chloe suggested. "Human," Daniel finished. They stopped outside the shelter, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the street. Daniel knew he should call his driver, return to his office, get back to his real life. But standing here with Chloe, he didn't want his real life. He wanted this, the simplicity, the connection, the way she looked at him like he mattered as a person. "That dinner offer," he said. "It still stands." Chloe bit her lower lip, a gesture that made Daniel's pulse skip. "I don't know if that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because you're she gestured at his expensive clothes, his bearing that spoke of wealth and power. "You're clearly successful, sophisticated. And I'm beautiful," Daniel said, kind, compassionate. Someone who sees the best in people. Chloe felt warmth spread through her. "Daniel?" "One dinner," he said, stepping closer. "Just to say thank you." She looked up at him, and Daniel saw the exact moment she made her decision. It was there in the softening of her expression. The way her body swayed slightly toward his. "Okay," she whispered. "One dinner." "Tomorrow night?" Daniel asked, not wanting to give her time to change her mind. "Tomorrow night," she agreed. Daniel smiled, the expression feeling rusty from disuse. "I'll pick you up at 7. "I'll meet you somewhere," Chloe said quickly. "Where did you have in mind?" Daniel almost suggested Le Bernardin or Daniel, places where he usually took business associates and dates. But looking at Chloe's worn jeans and secondhand sweater, he realized those places would only highlight the vast difference in their circumstances. "There's a little Italian place on Carmine Street," he said. "Nothing fancy. Giuseppe's?" Relief flickered across Chloe's features. "I know it. 7 o'clock?" 7 o'clock, Daniel confirmed. They stood there for another moment, neither wanting to be the first to leave. Finally, Chloe stepped back. "I should go," she said. "I have another job tonight." "Another job?" "I clean offices downtown. The night shift pays better." She said it matter-of-factly, without shame, but Daniel felt something twist in his chest at the thought of her working so hard just to survive. "How many jobs do you have?" he asked. 3, usually. 4 if you count the volunteering. Chloe shouldered her worn backpack. "I should go, I can't be late." She turned to leave, then looked back over her shoulder. "Daniel, today was wonderful. Thank you for helping. Thank you for letting me," he said. Daniel watched her walk away until she disappeared around the corner, then pulled out his phone to call his driver. As the car pulled up, he realized he was smiling, really smiling, for the first time in months. That night, as his driver navigated through Manhattan traffic, Daniel found himself thinking about gentle hands and amber eyes, about the way Chloe had looked at him when he'd admitted his past. No judgment, no calculation, just understanding. He thought about her working multiple jobs just to survive, about the way she'd treated every person in that shelter with dignity and respect, about how she'd made him feel useful, human, worthwhile for reasons that had nothing to do with his bank account. 24 hours until their dinner. 24 hours until he could see her again, talk to her, maybe discover if this connection between them was as real as it felt. Daniel touched the bandage on his palm and smiled again. He had no idea that at that exact moment, Chloe was standing in the bathroom of a downtown office building, staring at her reflection in the harsh fluorescent light and wondering what she'd gotten herself into. She'd recognized his last name the moment she'd seen it engraved on his watch. Kensington Industries was one of the largest tech companies in the city, which meant Daniel Kensington wasn't just successful. He was one of the richest men in Manhattan, and she was about to have dinner with him, wearing her only good dress and praying she could afford her half of the bill. Chloe closed her eyes and took a shaking breath. She'd made a mistake, a terrible, wonderful mistake that was going to break her heart. But as she picked up her cleaning supplies and got back to work, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at her when she touched his hand. Like she was something precious, like she mattered. For one night, maybe she could pretend that a man like Daniel Kensington could fall for a woman like her, even if they both knew it was impossible. Chloe stood outside Giuseppe's at exactly 7 o'clock, smoothing down her only good dress, a simple navy blue number she'd bought at a thrift store 2 years ago. Her hands were shaking as she checked her reflection in the restaurant window. She'd spent her lunch break getting her hair done at a beauty school where students practiced for $5, and she'd borrowed lipstick from her roommate. She'd also spent the last 24 hours researching Daniel Kensington online. The photos showed a man in expensive suits, cutting ribbons at charity events, shaking hands with politicians, accepting awards for business innovation. Net worth estimated at $3.8 billion, owner of a penthouse on the Upper East Side, worth more than most people made in a lifetime. And somehow, this man had spent an afternoon ladling soup in a homeless shelter because she'd asked him to. Chloe? She turned to find Daniel walking toward her, and her heart skipped against her ribs. He'd traded his business suit for dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that hugged his broad shoulders perfectly. His hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd run his hands through it, and when he smiled at her, those gray eyes lit up with genuine pleasure. "You look beautiful," he said. His voice, carrying that slight roughness she was beginning to recognize, appeared whenever he was nervous. "Thank you," she managed, acutely aware of how her discount dress compared to his obviously expensive clothes. "You look pretty good yourself." Daniel's smile widened. Shall we? He gestured toward the restaurant entrance, his hand hovering at the small of her back without quite touching. Giuseppe's was everything Daniel had promised. Small, intimate, with checkered tablecloths and the kind of worn wooden floors that spoke of decades of good food and happy customers. The owner, a robust Italian man with flour-dusted hands, greeted them at the door. "Welcome, welcome," Giuseppe beamed. "Table for two? I have perfect spot by the window." He led them to a corner table where soft candlelight created an intimate glow. Daniel pulled out Chloe's chair, a gesture so naturally gallant it made her heart flutter. "This place is wonderful," Chloe said, looking around at the family photos covering the walls. The wine bottles creating a rustic backdrop. "I discovered it about 5 years ago," Daniel said, settling across from her. "I was working late, walking around the neighborhood to clear my head, and I smelled the most incredible garlic bread." "You walked around the neighborhood?" Chloe asked, surprised. "Don't you have a driver?" Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. "I do, but sometimes I need to remember what the real world feels like." Their eyes met across the small table, and Chloe felt that same electric awareness from the shelter kitchen. In the candlelight, Daniel's features were softer, more vulnerable. The harsh businessman from the online photos was nowhere to be seen. "What can I bring you to drink?" Giuseppe appeared beside their table, interrupting the moment. "Wine?" Daniel asked Chloe. She hesitated. Wine at a restaurant like this would probably cost more than she made in a day. "Just water for me, please." "Are you sure? They have an excellent Chianti." "Water's fine," Chloe insisted, then caught Daniel's thoughtful expression. "I don't drink much," she added, which was true. She couldn't afford to. "2 waters," Daniel told Giuseppe. "And could we see your appetizer menu?" As Giuseppe bustled away, Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Are you comfortable here? We could go somewhere else if you'd prefer." "No, this is perfect," Chloe said quickly. "It's just, I'm not used to restaurants like this." "What are you used to?" Daniel asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Chloe considered lying, maintaining some dignity, but something about his expression, open, interested, without judgment, made her tell the truth. "Coffee shops mostly, the kind where you order at the counter and bus your own tables." She managed a self-deprecating smile. "Dinner out is usually pizza by the slice." Instead of the awkwardness she'd expected, Daniel's expression grew warm. "Some of my best meals have been pizza by the slice. There's something honest about it." "Honest?" "No pretense, no waiters hovering, no wine lists longer than novels. Just good food and whatever conversation happens naturally." Chloe felt some of her tension ease. "Is that what this is? Natural conversation?" "With you?" "Yes." Daniel's voice grew softer. "I can't remember the last time I had a conversation that felt this natural." Their food arrived, simple pasta dishes with rich, aromatic sauces that filled the air between them with warmth. As they ate, their conversation flowed like they'd known each other for years instead of days. Daniel told her about growing up in the foster system, about sleeping in his car during his first year of college, about building his first company with a borrowed laptop and determination. Chloe shared stories about her grandmother, about losing everything to medical bills, about finding purpose in helping others even when she could barely help herself. "Your grandmother sounds like an amazing woman," Daniel said, as Chloe finished telling him about the woman who'd raised her. "She was," Chloe said softly. "She taught me that your worth isn't measured by what you have, but by how you treat other people." "Smart woman," Daniel said, his fingers playing with the stem of his water glass. "I wish I'd learned that lesson earlier." "When did you learn it?" Daniel looked directly at her. 3 days ago, in a hospital supply closet." The air between them grew charged. Chloe felt her pulse accelerate as Daniel's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. "Chloe," he whispered, "I need to tell you something." Fear shot through her. He'd figured out that she knew who he was. He was going to end this before it really began. "What?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't stop thinking about you." His voice was rough with honesty. "Since that night at the hospital, you're all I think about. Your hands, your voice, the way you looked at me like I was worth something." Relief and desire crashed through her in equal measure. "Daniel, I know this is crazy," he continued. I know we barely know each other, but I feel something with you that I've never felt before. What do you feel? Chloe asked breathlessly. Daniel reached across the table, his fingers finding hers. The touch sent electricity shooting up her arm. Safe, he said simply. For the first time in my adult life, I feel safe with someone. Chloe's throat tightened with emotion. She turned her hand palm up, threading their fingers together. I feel something too, she admitted. Something that scares me. Why does it scare you? Because you're Daniel Kensington and I'm nobody, she thought. Because this is a fairy tale, and fairy tales don't come true for women like me. Because I don't want to get hurt, she said instead. Daniel's thumb traced across her knuckles. What if I told you I don't want to hurt you? What if I told you that hurting you would be like hurting myself? Chloe felt herself go still. In the candlelight, Daniel's eyes held an intensity that made her feel like she was the only woman in the world. I'd say that's a beautiful thing to tell someone, she whispered. They sat there, hands entwined across the table. The restaurant fading around them until it felt like they were the only two people in existence. Would you like to walk? Daniel asked eventually. There's a park nearby. We could talk more. Chloe nodded, not trusting her voice. Daniel signaled for the check, and when it came, she didn't even attempt to reach for her purse. The total would have been half her weekly grocery budget. Outside, the evening air was crisp with approaching autumn. Daniel offered her his arm, and Chloe slipped her hand through the crook of his elbow, acutely aware of the solid warmth of him beside her. Washington Square Park was quiet at this hour, lit by old-fashioned lampposts that created pools of golden light along the walking paths. They found a bench near the fountain and sat close enough that their knees touched. Tell me about your dreams, Daniel said softly. My dreams? What you want from life. What makes you happy? Chloe considered the question. Her real dreams felt too small, too ordinary to share with a billionaire. I want to teach again, she said finally. Elementary school kids. There's something magical about that age. They still believe anything is possible. Why aren't you teaching now? I can't afford to renew my certification, and even if I could, I'd need to take unpaid time for student teaching requirements. I can't survive without the income from my other jobs. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Money, he said finally. It's such a strange thing. Too little of it traps you. Too much of it isolates you. What do you mean? When you have as much as I do, you never know if people want you or what you can give them. Every relationship becomes transactional. Chloe turned to study his profile in the lamplight. Is that why you don't date much? Daniel looked surprised. How do you know I don't date much? Heat flooded Chloe's cheeks. She'd revealed too much. She'd clearly researched him online. You seem like someone who's been alone for a while, she said, hoping he'd accept the explanation. Daniel's expression softened. Very perceptive. Yes, I've been alone for a long time, by choice mostly. And now? Now I'm sitting in a park with a woman who makes me want to stop being alone. The words hung between them, heavy with promise and possibility. Chloe felt herself leaning toward him, drawn by an invisible force. She couldn't resist. Chloe, Daniel whispered, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. Yes? I'm going to kiss you now, if that's okay. Instead of answering, Chloe closed the distance between them. The moment their lips met, the world exploded into sensation. Daniel's mouth was warm and soft, moving against hers with a tenderness that made her chest ache. His hand threaded through her hair, holding her gently as he deepened the kiss. Chloe had been kissed before, but never like this. Never with such reverence, such careful attention to her response. Daniel kissed her like she was precious, like she was something to be cherished. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Daniel rested his forehead against hers, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. That was, he started. Perfect, Chloe finished. Perfect, he agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, Chloe's head on Daniel's shoulder, his arm around her waist. She could feel his heartbeat through his sweater. Steady and strong. I should probably get you home, Daniel said eventually, though his tone suggested it was the last thing he wanted to do. Probably, Chloe agreed, making no move to get up. Finally, reluctantly, they stood. Daniel hailed a taxi, giving the driver Chloe's address, a rundown building in Queens that she'd mentioned during dinner. In the back of the cab, they sat close together, Daniel's hand covering hers. Neither spoke, but the silence was full of promise. When they reached her building, Daniel walked her to the entrance. Under the harsh fluorescent light of the building's lobby, the differences between their worlds became starkly apparent. The peeling paint, the broken mailboxes, the smell of industrial cleaner couldn't have been more different from the elegant restaurant where they'd shared dinner. "This is me," Chloe said, suddenly self-conscious. "It's perfect," Daniel said simply. "Daniel, when can I see you again?" he asked. "I don't know if that's a good idea," Chloe said, though every fiber of her being wanted to say yes. "Why not?" "Because we live in different worlds," she thought. "Because you're a billionaire and I clean office buildings for a living. Because this feels too good to be real. Because this is complicated," she said instead. Daniel stepped closer, his hands coming up to frame her face. "All the best things are complicated. Is that what this is? A good thing?" "The best thing," Daniel said with quiet conviction. "The best thing that's ever happened to me." Before Chloe could respond, Daniel kissed her again. This time the kiss was deeper, more urgent, full of all the things they couldn't say out loud. When they broke apart, Chloe was dizzy with want. "Saturday," she said breathlessly. "I'm free Saturday evening." Daniel smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. "Saturday evening, I'll call you." "You don't have my number. Then give it to me." Chloe recited her number, watching as Daniel programmed it into his phone, a device that probably cost more than she made in a month. "Good night, Chloe Hope Matthews," he said, using her full name like a caress. "Good night, Daniel." Chloe watched through the lobby window as Daniel climbed back into the taxi. Only when the red taillights disappeared around the corner did she allow herself to slump against the wall. What was she doing? What was she thinking? Kissing a billionaire? Agreeing to see him again? This could only end in heartbreak. But as she rode the creaky elevator to her fourth-floor apartment, Chloe couldn't stop touching her lips. Couldn't stop thinking about the way Daniel had looked at her, like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. For one perfect evening, she'd been just Chloe. Not poor Chloe, or struggling Chloe, or Chloe who couldn't afford dinner. She'd been a woman having dinner with a man who made her feel like she was worth something. In her tiny studio apartment, Chloe changed into her pajamas and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her phone sat on the nightstand, and she found herself checking it every few minutes, hoping for a text from Daniel. At 11:47 p.m., it finally came. "Thank you for tonight. You're extraordinary. Sweet dreams, beautiful." Chloe held the phone to her chest and smiled. Maybe fairy tales could come true, even for women like her. She had no idea that 15 miles away, Daniel was standing at the windows of his penthouse and thinking about her. He'd never felt anything like what he'd experienced tonight. The simple pleasure of conversation with someone who saw him as a man rather than a bank account. He thought about the way Chloe had hesitated over the wine, the careful way she'd studied the menu, and he realized she'd been worried about money. The knowledge made something protective and tender unfurl in his chest. Tomorrow, he would figure out a way to help her without making her feel like charity. Tonight, he would fall asleep thinking about the taste of her lips and the sound of her laugh. For the first time in 24 years, Daniel Kensington was planning his life around someone else's happiness, and it felt like coming home. Saturday arrived with an autumn storm that turned Manhattan streets into rivers and set most people scurrying for shelter. Chloe stood at her apartment window, watching the rain slash against the glass, her phone clutched in her hand. Daniel had called that morning, his voice warm and intimate through the speaker. "The weather's terrible," he'd said. "Would you mind if we stayed in tonight? I could cook for you." "You cook?" Chloe had asked, surprised. Full of surprises, Daniels had replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "My place at 7? I'll send a car." Now, as Chloe applied the last touch of lipstick, she wondered what she was walking into. She'd spent the week trying to convince herself this was just dinner with a friend. But the butterflies in her stomach knew better. The car Daniel sent was nothing like she'd expected. Not a limousine or even a town car, but a simple black sedan with a kind-faced driver who opened an umbrella for her and made sure she stayed dry. "Mr. Kensington is waiting upstairs," the doorman said when they arrived at Daniel's building. 42nd floor. The elevator is programmed. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt endless. Chloe's reflection in the polished steel doors showed a woman in her best jeans and a soft emerald sweater, her hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. She looked nice, she thought, but did she look like she belonged in a billionaire's penthouse? The elevator opened directly into Daniel's apartment, and Chloe felt momentarily dizzy from the grandeur. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the living space, offering a panoramic view of Manhattan spread out below like a glittering tapestry. The apartment was elegant but not ostentatious. Warm hardwood floors, comfortable furniture in rich earth tones. Bookshelves that reached the ceiling, filled with well-worn volumes. "Chloe." Daniel appeared from what must have been the kitchen, and her heart did a little flip. He wore dark jeans and a cream-colored cable-knit sweater that hugged his broad shoulders. His feet were bare, and his hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it. He looked relaxed, approachable, and devastatingly handsome. "This is incredible," Chloe said, gesturing at the view. "It's better with you in it," Daniel replied, crossing to her. He kissed her cheek, a gesture so natural and intimate it made her knees weak. "Can I take your coat?" Chloe shrugged out of her rain jacket, acutely aware of Daniel's hands brushing her shoulders as he helped her. The simple touch sent warmth spiraling through her. "Something smells amazing," she said. "Pasta puttanesca," Daniel said, leading her toward the kitchen. "It's one of the few dishes I actually know how to make well." The kitchen was a chef's dream. Marble countertops, professional-grade appliances, windows that looked out over Central Park. But what caught Chloe's attention was the evidence of actual cooking. Flour dusted across the counter, empty wine bottles that had clearly been used for the sauce, a pasta machine that looked well used. "You really do cook," she said, surprised. "Surprised? I thought all billionaires just had personal chefs." Daniel paused in stirring the sauce. "Is that what you think I am? A billionaire?" Chloe's heart stopped. She'd revealed too much, let slip that she knew exactly who he was. "I saw your name on your watch that first night," she said carefully. "And I might have looked you up online." Daniel set down the wooden spoon and turned to face her fully. His expression was unreadable. "What did you find?" "Kensington Industries. Net worth estimated at $3.8 billion. Owner of this penthouse. Philanthropist. Bachelor." Chloe's voice grew smaller with each word. "I know who you are, Daniel. And yet you're still here." "And yet I'm still here," Chloe confirmed. They stared at each other across the kitchen island. Chloe held her breath, waiting for Daniel to ask her to leave, to accuse her of being a gold digger, to end this beautiful dream before it could really begin. Instead, Daniel walked around the island until he was standing directly in front of her. "I'm glad you know," he said. "I was wondering how to tell you. I was afraid you'd run." "I thought about it," Chloe admitted. "When I realized who you were, I thought about not coming tonight." "What changed your mind?" Chloe looked up into his eyes and told him the truth. "The way you looked at me when you kissed me. Like I was the only woman in the world." Daniel's hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones. "You are," he said simply. "You are the only woman in my world." Before Chloe could respond, Daniel was kissing her. This kiss was different from the ones they'd shared in the park. Deeper, more urgent, full of a hunger that made her pulse race. Chloe melted into him, her hands fisting in his sweater, pulling him closer. Daniel's arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her slightly so she was pressed against his chest, her feet barely touching the floor. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "The pasta," Daniel said against her lips. "What about it?" "It's going to overcook." "I don't care," Chloe whispered, and she meant it. Daniel groaned softly, then set her down and moved to turn off the burner. "Dinner first," he said, though his voice was rough with want. "I want to take care of you." They ate at Daniel's dining table, The storm raging outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights blurred by rain into abstract art. The pasta was perfect, but Chloe barely tasted it. She was too focused on Daniel. The way he listened when she talked. The way his eyes never left her face. The way his fingers played with the stem of his wine glass like he was thinking about touching her instead. "Tell me about your work," Chloe said, desperate for distraction from the building heat between them. "It's mostly boring," Daniel said. "Technology solutions for businesses. Not nearly as interesting as what you do." "What I do," Chloe laughed. "I clean office buildings and serve soup." "You take care of people," Daniel corrected. "You make a difference in their lives. When was the last time my work actually helped someone?" "Your company employs thousands of people," Chloe pointed out. "My company makes money," Daniel said. "There's a difference." They talked through dinner about everything and nothing. Books they'd read, places they wanted to travel, childhood memories. With each passing minute, the air between them grew more charged. When Daniel stood to clear the dishes, Chloe followed him to the kitchen. "Let me help," she said, reaching for plates. "You're my guest," Daniel protested. "I'm your—" "What am I, exactly?" Chloe asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Daniel set down the dishes and turned to face her. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I've never felt anything like this before. I don't have words for what you are to me." "Try," Chloe whispered. Daniel stepped closer, backing her against the kitchen counter. "You're the woman who saw me bleeding and broken and didn't see a business opportunity. You're the woman who treated me with kindness when I was at my lowest. You're the woman who makes me want to be better than I am." His hands braced on either side of her, trapping her between his body and the counter. The heat of him was overwhelming, intoxicating. "Daniel," Chloe breathed. "You're the woman I'm falling in love with," he confessed. The words hit Chloe like a physical blow. She gasped, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. "You can't mean that," she whispered. "Why can't I?" "Because we've known each other a week. Because I'm nobody. Because this is crazy." Daniel's hand came up to cup her cheek. "Look at me, Chloe." She met his eyes, seeing her own desire reflected in those gray depths. "I have never said those words to another woman," he said. "Not once in 38 years. I don't say things I don't mean. Daniel, I love the way you see the best in people. I love your compassion, your strength, your dignity. I love the way you make me feel like I'm worth something, beyond my bank account." Tears pricked at Chloe's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered, the admission torn from somewhere deep in her chest. The moment the words left her lips, Daniel was kissing her again. This kiss was fire and desperation. Weeks of building tension, finally finding release. Chloe kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him down to her. Daniel's hands roamed her back, her waist, learning the shape of her through her sweater. When his lips trailed down to her neck, Chloe made a sound that was half gasp, half moan. "Chloe," Daniel said against her throat, his voice rough with need. "Are you sure? Because if we don't stop now—" "I'm sure," Chloe said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I've never been more sure of anything." Daniel pulled back to look at her, searching her face. Whatever he saw there satisfied him because he took her hand and led her from the kitchen. His bedroom was as elegant as the rest of the apartment, a king-sized bed with crisp white linens, more floor-to-ceiling windows, soft lighting that made everything feel warm and intimate. But Chloe barely noticed the surroundings. All her attention was focused on Daniel as he turned to face her, his eyes dark with desire and something deeper. "You're so beautiful," he said, his voice reverent. "So are you," Chloe replied, and meant it. In the soft bedroom lighting, Daniel looked like something carved from marble, all strong lines and masculine grace. He reached for the hem of her sweater, then paused. "Is this okay?" Instead of answering, Chloe raised her arms, letting him pull the sweater over her head. Daniel's chest tightened as he looked at her, and Chloe felt beautiful under his gaze instead of self-conscious. "Perfect," he murmured, his hand skimming her bare shoulders. "You're perfect." Chloe tugged at his sweater, and Daniel helped her remove it, revealing a chest that was broad and muscled, marked with scars that spoke of a childhood that hadn't been easy. "Your turn to be perfect," Chloe said, her fingers tracing one of the scars. Daniel caught her hand, bringing it to his lips to press a kiss to her palm. "I'm not," he said. "But with you, I want to be." What happened next was a symphony of gentle touches and whispered words, of two people discovering each other with reverence and care. Daniel worshipped Chloe's body like she was something sacred, taking his time, making sure she felt cherished and loved. When they finally came together completely, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to Chloe's eyes. Daniel held her like she was precious, moved with her like they were dancing to music only they could hear. "I love you," he whispered against her ear as they moved together. "I love you. So much." "I love you too," Chloe gasped, overwhelmed by the intensity of what she was feeling. Not just physical pleasure, but emotional completion, like she'd found the missing piece of herself. Afterward, they lay entwined in Daniel's bed, the storm still raging outside, but forgotten in the warmth of each other's arms. Chloe's head rested on Daniel's chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "That was," she began. "Life-changing," Daniel finished, his fingers combing through her hair. "Is that what this is? Life-changing? For me?" "Yes." Daniel tilted her chin up so he could see her face. "Is it for you?" Chloe thought about the woman she'd been a week ago, working multiple jobs, struggling to survive, believing she was destined for a life of barely getting by. That woman felt like a stranger now. "Yes," she said simply. Daniel smiled, the expression soft and satisfied. "Good, because I have plans for us." "What kind of plans?" "The kind that involve you never having to clean another office building. The kind that involve me helping you get your teaching certification back. The kind that involve forever." Chloe's voice wavered. "Daniel, you can't just fix my life." "Why not?" "Because it would make me feel like charity." Daniel rolled over, pinning her gently beneath him. "Look at me," he said seriously. "What we just shared. Does that feel like charity to you?" "No," Chloe admitted. "It feels like love. Real, honest, life-changing love. And when you love someone, you want to help them achieve their dreams. You want to give them the world. But your world and my world are so different." "They're not different anymore," Daniel interrupted. "They're the same world now. Our world." As if to prove his point, Daniel kissed her again, and Chloe felt herself melting into him once more. Outside, the storm began to quiet. But inside Daniel's bedroom, their own storm was just beginning. They made love again, as the rain turned to gentle pattering against the windows. And when they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, both knew that everything had changed. Chloe dreamed of classrooms full of eager children and a man who looked at her like she hung the moon. Daniel dreamed of a woman who'd seen past his wealth to the man underneath and loved him anyway. Neither of them knew that by morning, their perfect bubble would be shattered by a phone call that would threaten everything they'd built together. But for now, wrapped in each other's arms while the storm subsided outside, they were complete. For now, love was enough. The phone call came at 6:30 in the morning, ripping Daniel from the deepest, most peaceful sleep of his life. Chloe stirred in his arms as he reached for his phone, her warm body pressed against his side like she belonged there. "Don't answer it," she murmured against his chest, her lips brushing his skin in a way that made his pulse jump. "I have to," Daniel said, though every instinct told him to turn the phone off and lose himself in her again. It might be important. The caller ID showed his assistant's number. Rebecca never called on Sunday mornings, unless something catastrophic had happened. "Daniel?" Rebecca's voice was tight with stress. "I'm sorry to call so early, but we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" Daniel asked, his arm tightening around Chloe as dread settled in his stomach. "Photos," Rebecca said, her usual corporate composure cracking. "Of you and a woman. They're everywhere. And Daniel, I've been doing damage control for 15 years, but I've never seen anything spread this fast." Daniel's blood turned to ice. "What photos?" "You leaving Giuseppe's restaurant Friday night. You kissing her outside a building in Queens. The car service picking her up yesterday evening." Rebecca's voice was carefully neutral. "The story breaks in an hour. I've been fielding calls from reporters since 5 a.m. Chloe had gone very still in his arms. She was listening, and from her expression, she understood exactly what this meant. "What's the angle?" Daniel asked, though he already knew. "Billionaire's mystery woman, from riches to rags romance. Some are calling it a publicity stunt for your upcoming IPO announcement." "It's not a publicity stunt," Daniel said quietly. "I know that," Rebecca replied. "But they don't. Daniel, you need to know. They've identified her. Chloe Matthews, 29, works multiple minimum wage jobs, lives in subsidized housing. They're painting her as either a gold digger or your charity case." Chloe sat up abruptly, pulling the sheet around herself. Her face had gone pale, and Daniel could see the exact moment his world invaded hers, shattering the intimate bubble they'd created. "I'll handle it," Daniel told Rebecca. "Don't make any statements. Don't confirm or deny anything. I'll call you back." He hung up and immediately reached for Chloe, but she was already sliding out of bed, gathering her clothes from the floor. "Chloe, wait," he said. "I need to go," she said, not looking at him as she pulled on her jeans with shaking hands. "Please, let's talk about this." "Talk about what?" Chloe turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "About how I'm going to be splashed across every gossip rag in the city as your charity case? About how everyone will think I'm sleeping with you for money? What other people think doesn't matter," Daniel said, standing and reaching for his own clothes. "What matters is us. What we have is real." "Is it?" Chloe's voice broke slightly. "Or are you just playing out some pretty woman fantasy with the poor girl?" The accusation hit Daniel like a physical blow. How can he say that? After last night, how can he think that's what this is? "Because that's what everyone else will think," Chloe said, struggling with her sweater. "And eventually, their voices will get louder than mine." Daniel crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Look at me," he said urgently. "What we have is real. What I feel for you is real. I love you, Chloe, not because you're a project or a fantasy, but because you're you." Tears spilled down Chloe's cheeks. "I love you too," she whispered. "That's why I have to go." "That makes no sense, doesn't it?" Chloe pulled her hands free. "Daniel, I've seen what your world looks like. I've researched you, remember? The charity galas, the society events, the business meetings with people who have more money than small countries. I don't belong in that world. You belong with me," Daniel said fiercely. "That's all that matters." "No, it's not." Chloe found her shoes, slipping them on with trembling fingers. "Your business, your reputation, your relationships with investors, all of that will be affected by this. And I can't be the reason your life falls apart." Daniel's phone rang again, then again. The sound filled the bedroom like an alarm, a reminder that the outside world was already intruding on what they'd built together. "See?" Chloe said sadly. "It's already starting." Daniel turned his phone off, then grabbed Chloe's shoulders. "I don't care about any of that. I care about you." "But I care about you," Chloe said, "and I won't be the reason you lose everything you've worked for." Before Daniel could respond, Chloe was walking toward the bedroom door. He followed her through the apartment, desperate to make her understand. "Chloe, please," he said as she reached for her coat. "Don't leave like this. We can figure this out together." "How?" Chloe turned to face him, her expression breaking his heart. "How do we figure out the fact that dating me will make you a laughingstock? How do we figure out that everyone will assume I'm using you? How do we figure out that I'll never be good enough for your world?" "You're more than good enough," Daniel said desperately. "You're everything I never knew I needed. And you're everything I could never deserve," Chloe replied. "This was a beautiful dream, Daniel, but dreams end." She kissed him then, soft and brief and full of goodbye. Before Daniel could react, she was stepping into the elevator, the doors closing between them like a wall. Daniel stood in his empty apartment, the silence deafening after the warmth of her presence. His phone, which he'd turned back on, was buzzing constantly with calls and messages. He ignored them all and went to the window, looking out over the city where somewhere Chloe was believing that she wasn't good enough for him, when the truth was exactly the opposite. Daniel Kensington had built an empire by being strategic, by calculating every move, by never letting emotion override logic. But as he stood in his penthouse, he realized that all the money in the world meant nothing if he didn't have someone to share it with. Someone who loved him for who he was, not what he could provide. Someone who was currently on a subway train back to Queens, crying into her hands, while other passengers pretended not to notice. By the time Chloe reached her apartment, the story was everywhere. Her phone had 17 missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize, and when she made the mistake of checking social media, she found photos of herself that made her stomach turn. There she was, kissing Daniel outside Giuseppe's, looking starry-eyed and naive. There she was, getting into the car he'd sent, wearing her best outfit that suddenly looked shabby and desperate in the unforgiving camera flash. The comments were worse than the photos. Gold digger alert. How much do you want to bet she's pregnant? Publicity stunt for sure. No way a billionaire actually dates a cleaning lady. Poor guy doesn't realize she's just using him. Chloe turned off her phone and curled up on her narrow bed, pulling her grandmother's quilt over her head. The quilt still smelled faintly of lavender and comfort, of a time when love had been simple and real. Had she been naive to think that what she and Daniel shared could transcend their different worlds? Had she been foolish to believe that love could be enough? A knock at her door made her freeze. Reporters, probably, looking for a quote or a photo. She ignored it, but the knocking persisted. "Chloe, honey, it's Mrs. Rodriguez from downstairs. I know you're in there." Chloe reluctantly opened the door to find her elderly neighbor holding a cup of tea and wearing an expression of maternal concern. "I saw the news," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently. "Figured you might need a friend." Chloe burst into tears. Mrs. Rodriguez spent the next hour holding Chloe while she cried, listening to the whole story without judgment. When Chloe finally composed herself, her neighbor studied her with shrewd eyes. "You love him?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, setting down her teacup with the deliberate care of someone who'd survived 47 years of marriage. "Yes," Chloe whispered, "and he loves you." Her weathered hands reached for Chloe's, surprisingly strong and warm. "He says he does." Chloe's voice was barely audible. "Then what's the problem?" Chloe stared at her. "Did you see those photos? Those comments? I'm being torn apart by people who don't even know me. And you care what strangers think more than what the man you love thinks? It's not that simple. Isn't it?" Mrs. Rodriguez set down her teacup. "Honey, I've been married for 47 years. You know what I've learned? Love doesn't care about bank accounts or social status or what other people think. Love cares about two people who make each other happy. But his world will adapt," Mrs. Rodriguez said firmly. "If he's worth loving, he'll make sure of it. And if he's not worth loving, then you're better off without him. What if I hold him back? What if being with me ruins his business, his reputation? What if being without you ruins his life?" The question hung in the air long after Mrs. Rodriguez left. Chloe sat in her tiny apartment, thinking about the way Daniel had looked at her when he'd said he loved her, the way he'd held her like she was precious, the way he'd made her feel like she was enough just as she was. Meanwhile, 15 miles away, Daniel was pacing his office on a Sunday afternoon, trying to figure out how to fix this. His phone hadn't stopped ringing. Reporters, board members, investors, all wanting to know about his mystery woman. Rebecca had drafted 3 different press releases. The first painted Chloe as a longtime friend, the second as a business acquaintance, the third simply stated that his personal life was private. Daniel deleted them all. "Sir?" Rebecca looked up from her laptop. "We need to respond to something. The speculation is getting out of hand." "Then we tell the truth," Daniel said. "Which is that I'm in love with an extraordinary woman named Chloe Matthews, that she's kind, intelligent, compassionate, and the best thing that's ever happened to me. That anyone who has a problem with that can go to hell." Rebecca blinked. "Sir, with respect, that might not be the most strategic response." "I don't care about strategy," Daniel said. "I care about the woman I love believing that she's not good enough for me, when the truth is I'm not good enough for her. What do you want me to do?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then his expression grew determined. "Schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning," he said. "And get me the number for the 5th Street Community Center. I have some calls to make." "What kind of press conference?" "The kind where I make it very clear that Chloe Matthews is the woman I intend to spend the rest of my life with. And anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to take their business elsewhere." Rebecca stared at him. "Daniel, that could cost you millions in investor confidence. And losing her would cost me everything that actually matters," Daniel replied. "Make the calls, Rebecca. It's time the world met the real Daniel Kensington." As Rebecca reluctantly began making arrangements, Daniel stood at his office windows, looking out over the city. Somewhere out there, Chloe was hurting because of the world he'd brought into her life. Somewhere out there, the woman he loved was believing lies about her own worth. He'd built his empire by being ruthless, by putting business before everything else. But Chloe had changed him, had shown him what really mattered. And what mattered wasn't stock prices or board approval or investor confidence. What mattered was making sure the woman he loved knew that she was worth more than all of it combined. Tomorrow he would prove it to her. Tomorrow he would show the world that love really could conquer all, even the vast difference between a billionaire's penthouse and a fourth-floor walk-up in Queens. But tonight, both Daniel and Chloe would go to sleep alone, each convinced they were protecting the other by staying away, neither realizing that what they'd found together was worth fighting for, neither realizing that the real battle for their love was just beginning. Monday morning arrived with a media circus that turned the lobby of Kensington Industries into a war zone. Reporters jammed the sidewalks outside the Manhattan headquarters, cameras flashing, microphones thrust toward anyone who looked like they might have information about Daniel Kensington's mystery romance. Inside the 47th floor boardroom, 12 of the most powerful investors in the city sat around a polished conference table, their expressions ranging from concerned to furious. At the head of the table, Daniel's chair sat empty. "Where the hell is he?" demanded Gregory Kennedy, the silver-haired CEO of Meridian Capital. "We're supposed to announce the IPO in 2 weeks, and instead we're fielding questions about his love life? The stock price has already dropped 3%, added Victoria Blair from Paramount Investments, though she couldn't hide a trace of admiration in her voice. "Though I'll admit, the public response has been unexpectedly positive." Rebecca stood at the front of the room, her usual composure cracking under the pressure. "Mr. Kensington will be here shortly. He's asked me to assure you that this situation is under control." "Under control?" Kennedy's voice rose. "There are photos of him kissing some cleaning lady all over the internet. The business press is calling it everything from a midlife crisis to a publicity stunt gone wrong." "I understand your concerns," Rebecca began. "Do you?" Victoria leaned forward, her eyes cold. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like your boss has lost his mind over some gold digger who saw an opportunity." The boardroom door opened and Daniel walked in. He wore his usual expensive suit. But something about his bearing had changed. There was a steel in his spine that hadn't been there before, a quiet determination that made the room fall silent. "Good morning," Daniel said, taking his seat at the head of the table. "I appreciate you all coming on such short notice." "Daniel," Kennedy began, "we need to discuss damage control. This situation with this woman." "Her name is Chloe," Daniel interrupted firmly. "Chloe Matthews. And she's not a situation. She's the woman I love." The silence that followed was deafening. "Daniel," Victoria said carefully, "we understand that you're fond of her, but you have to consider the optics. A billionaire dating a minimum wage worker looks like either charity or exploitation." "Or love," Daniel said simply. "Love doesn't drive stock prices," Kennedy snapped. "Investor confidence does. And right now, our confidence in your judgment is severely shaken." Daniel looked around the table at faces he'd known for years, people who'd helped him build his empire, who'd trusted him with their money and their faith. "Let me be very clear," he said, his voice steady, but carrying an edge of steel. "Chloe Matthews is the best thing that has ever happened to me. She's kind, intelligent, compassionate, and worth more than every dollar in this room combined." "That's very romantic," Victoria said dryly, "but romance doesn't pay dividends." "Neither does building an empire if you have no one to share it with," Daniel replied. Kennedy leaned forward. "Daniel, be practical. You can date whoever you want privately, but public perception matters. Maybe tone things down until after the IPO." "No." The single word cut through the room like a blade. "No?" Kennedy's eyebrows rose. "I will not hide the woman I love. I will not pretend she doesn't matter to me, and I will not sacrifice my happiness for your stock portfolios." The room erupted. Voices rose, hands gestured, accusations flew. Through it all, Daniel sat calmly. watching the faces of people he thought he could trust. Then a quiet voice cut through the chaos. Enough. Margaret Ellis, the oldest member of the board and founder of Pinnacle Ventures, raised her weathered hand. At 73, she commanded respect that silenced the room instantly. I've been investing for 50 years, and you know what I've learned? The best leaders are the ones who understand that business without humanity is just greed in expensive suits. She looked directly at Daniel. A man who's brave enough to choose love over profit margins publicly is exactly the kind of CEO I want leading my investments. Daniel, you have my full support. Kennedy stared at Margaret in shock. Margaret, you can't be serious. I'm dead serious, Margaret replied crisply. And anyone who thinks authentic leadership is bad for business hasn't been paying attention to market trends. Consumers want leaders with values, not just valuations. You're making a mistake, Victoria said, when the noise died down. $1 billion mistake. The only mistake I made, Daniel said, standing, was waiting this long to tell all of you exactly where you can put your concerns about my personal life. He walked toward the door, then turned back. The press conference is in 1 hour. Anyone who has a problem with my choices is welcome to divest their holdings. Anyone who's willing to support a CEO who's finally figured out what actually matters in life is welcome to stay. Daniel left the boardroom and headed for the elevator, Rebecca hurrying to catch up. Sir, she said breathlessly, what about the IPO? What about the investors? What about them? Daniel asked as the elevator descended. They could pull out. You could lose everything. Daniel thought about Chloe's hands cleaning his wound, about the way she'd looked at him like he was worth something beyond his bank account, about the feel of her body against his as she'd whispered that she loved him. Not everything, he said quietly. The lobby was chaos. The moment Daniel stepped off the elevator, camera flashes exploded around him. Reporters shouted questions. Security guards struggled to maintain order, and somewhere in the crowd, Daniel caught sight of a familiar face. Chloe stood near the back of the crowd, partially hidden behind a pillar. She wore her cleaning uniform. She must have come straight from work. Her eyes were wide with shock as she watched the media circus swirling around him. Their eyes met across the chaos, and Daniel felt his heart stop. She was here. Despite everything, despite the photos and the cruel comments and the media storm, she was here. He started toward her, pushing through the crowd of reporters. But before he could reach her, his security team was pulling him toward the conference room where the press conference had been set up. Daniel, reporters shouted questions. Is it true you're dating a homeless shelter volunteer? Are you engaged? Is this a publicity stunt? Daniel let himself be guided to the podium, microphones bristling in front of him like a forest of metal trees. The room was packed with reporters, cameras, curious onlookers, and there, near the back, partially hidden but still visible, was Chloe. Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. Thank you for coming. I know there's been a lot of speculation about my personal life, so I wanted to set the record straight. The room fell silent, every reporter leaning forward. 2 weeks ago, I was mugged during the power outage. I was bleeding, disoriented, and completely alone. A woman found me outside the hospital and took care of me. She cleaned my wounds, bandaged my hand, and treated me with a kindness I didn't deserve. Daniel's eyes found Chloe's across the room. She was listening, tears streaming down her face. That woman was Chloe Matthews. She's 29 years old. She volunteers at homeless shelters. She works multiple jobs to survive, and she has never asked me for a single thing. Not money, not favors, not access to my world. The reporters were scribbling furiously, cameras flashing. She is also, Daniel continued, his voice growing stronger, the most extraordinary person I have ever met. She's intelligent, compassionate, and dignified. She sees the best in people. She helps others without expecting anything in return, and she has shown me what it means to be truly wealthy. Someone called out, "Are you saying you're in a relationship with her?" "I'm saying I'm in love with her," Daniel replied without hesitation. Completely, utterly, irrevocably in love with her. The room erupted with questions, but Daniel held up his hand for silence. I know some of you think this is a publicity stunt. I know some of you think she's using me, or I'm using her, or this is some kind of charity case. You're all wrong. Daniel stepped away from the podium, moving closer to the crowd. What this is a man who spent decades building walls around his heart, finally meeting someone gentle enough and strong enough to tear them down. What this is discovering that all the money in the world means nothing if you don't have someone who loves you for who you are, not what you can provide. He was walking through the crowd now, reporters parting like water, cameras following his every move. Chloe Matthews doesn't need my money. She doesn't need my connections or my influence or my world. But I need her. I need her kindness, her strength, her ability to see the good in people, even when they can't see it in themselves. Daniel had reached the back of the room now, standing directly in front of Chloe. She was crying openly, her hand pressed to her mouth. I need her because she makes me want to be better than I am. Because she showed me that success isn't measured in stock prices or profit margins, but in how you treat the people around you. Because she loved me when I was just a bleeding stranger, not a billionaire. Daniel took Chloe's hands in his, and the room fell completely silent. Chloe Hope Matthews, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the microphones. You are the love of my life. You are my heart, my soul, my future, and I don't care who knows it. Daniel, Chloe whispered, her voice breaking. I love you, he said, loud enough for every camera and microphone to catch. Not because you're a project or a fantasy or a rebellion. I love you because you're you. Because you make me human again. Before Chloe could respond, Daniel was kissing her. Right there, in front of dozens of cameras and reporters, he kissed her like she was the only woman in the world. When they broke apart, the room was silent except for the clicking of camera shutters. Any other questions? Daniel asked the crowd, his arm around Chloe's waist. What about your investors? Someone called out. What about the IPO? Daniel looked down at Chloe, who was staring up at him with wonder and love shining in her eyes. What about them? He replied. I just told you what really matters. The crowd erupted with more questions, but Daniel was already leading Chloe toward the exit, his security team clearing a path through the chaos. Daniel, Chloe said as they reached the elevator, your business, your reputation, will survive or they won't, Daniel interrupted. But I won't survive without you. Are you sure? Chloe asked, her hands framing his face. Are you absolutely sure this is what you want? I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Daniel said. The question is, are you sure? Are you willing to face this world with me? Are you willing to let me love you the way you deserve to be loved? Chloe looked into those penetrating eyes that had first captivated her in a hospital supply closet. Saw the man who'd served soup in a shelter, who'd held her like she was precious, who'd just risked everything he'd built to prove that she mattered. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. Daniel kissed her again as the elevator doors closed, shutting out the chaos of the outside world. They had each other, and for the moment, that was enough. But as the elevator rose toward Daniel's office, both knew that the real test of their love was just beginning. The world was watching now, judging, waiting to see if a billionaire's love for a woman with nothing could survive the scrutiny. Neither of them cared. They had found something worth more than money. More valuable than reputation, more lasting than stock prices. They had found each other, and they were finally ready to fight for it. Take a moment to share in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between what others expected of you and what your heart knew was right? Your stories matter to our Royal Story family. 6 months later, Chloe stood in front of her new second-grade classroom, watching 22 eager faces look back at her with the kind of wonder that made her heart sing. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the private school that Daniel had helped establish, specifically for children from underserved communities. A school where the best education was free, where every child was valued regardless of their background. Good morning, class, Chloe said, her voice warm with the joy she'd rediscovered in teaching. Good morning, Miss Matthews. 22 voices chorused back. Chloe smiled as she began the day's lesson, still amazed by how much her life had changed. After Daniel's press conference, the media storm had raged for weeks. Some outlets painted her as a gold digger, others as Daniel's salvation, The truth, as always, had been more complex and more beautiful than either narrative. The business world's reaction had been swift and divided. 3 major investors had pulled out of Kensington Industries, calling Daniel's public declaration unprofessional and a liability. But for every investor who left, 2 more had stepped forward, drawn by Daniel's authenticity and his company's proven track record. A CEO who's honest about his values is exactly the kind of leader we want to invest in. One new partner had said during a meeting Chloe had attended, "The fact that he chose love over profit margin tells us everything we need to know about his character." The IPO had proceeded as planned, and despite the initial volatility, Kensington Industries stock had stabilized at record highs. Apparently, the public found Daniel's love story as compelling as Chloe did. More importantly, their relationship had not only survived the scrutiny, it had thrived under it. "Miss Matthews?" A small voice interrupted her thoughts. Jasmine, a 7-year-old with enormous brown eyes and hair in neat braids, was raising her hand. "Is it true that you're marrying a prince?" Chloe bit back a smile. The children had heard various versions of her story, and somehow Daniel had become a prince in their imaginations. "Well," Chloe said, crouching down to Jasmine's level, "he's not exactly a prince, but he is a very good man who helps people, just like all of you will when you grow up." "Will he come visit us again?" asked Devon, a boy whose enthusiasm for math reminded Chloe of herself at that age. "Actually," said a familiar voice from the doorway, "he's here right now." Chloe's heart skipped as Daniel appeared in the classroom doorway, looking devastatingly handsome in his dark suit, but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up, a look she'd come to associate with him leaving his corporate world behind to enter hers. "Mr. Daniel," the children erupted in excited voices, rushing toward him like he was indeed royalty. Daniel laughed, accepting their enthusiastic hugs with the natural warmth that had surprised everyone who'd only known his business persona. Watching him interact with her students, Chloe felt the same surge of love and pride that hit her every time she saw this side of him. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Daniel said, his eyes finding Chloe's across the classroom. "Never," she replied, and meant it completely. "Actually, I came to ask Miss Matthews a very important question," Daniel continued, his voice taking on a tone that made Chloe's pulse quicken. "But I think I need all of your help." The children gathered around eagerly as Daniel reached into his jacket pocket. Chloe felt the world tilt as he pulled out a small velvet box that made her knees go weak. "Children," Daniel said solemnly, "I love your teacher very much. She makes me want to be the best version of myself every single day. Do you think I should ask her to marry me?" The classroom erupted in squeals and shouts of "yes" and "do it," and "she said you're not a prince, but you're still really nice." Through the chaos of excited voices, Chloe watched Daniel walk toward her, that small box in his hands and an expression of nervous hope on his face that made her fall in love with him all over again. "Chloe Hope Matthews," Daniel said, dropping to one knee in front of her desk, while 22 children watched with rapt attention. "6 months ago, you bandaged my hand in a hospital supply closet, but what you really did was heal my heart." Tears were already streaming down Chloe's face as Daniel opened the box to reveal a ring that took her breath away. It wasn't the massive diamond she might have expected from a billionaire. Instead, it was a delicate band of white gold, set with a perfect amber stone surrounded by smaller diamonds that caught the classroom light like captured sunshine. "It's amber," Daniel said softly, "like your eyes, like the warmth you brought into my cold world, like the light you shine on everyone around you." "Daniel," Chloe whispered, her hand pressed to her mouth, "you taught me that love isn't about what you can buy or build or achieve. It's about finding someone who sees your soul and chooses to love it anyway. You loved me when I was just a bleeding stranger, and you've loved me through every challenge we faced since." Daniel's voice grew stronger, more certain. "You make me want to be worthy of the kindness you show to everyone. You make me want to build schools instead of just profits, to help people instead of just acquiring companies. You make me want to be the man you see when you look at me." "Say yes," Jasmine stage whispered, making several children giggle. "Will you marry me, Chloe?" Daniel asked, his gaze holding hers. Will you let me love you for the rest of our lives? Will you help me build something beautiful together? Chloe looked down at the man who risked his empire to prove she mattered, who'd stood up to investors and media and social pressures to defend their love, who'd spent the last 6 months proving every day that she was worth fighting for. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, of course, yes. The classroom erupted as Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her. The children cheered and clapped, and somewhere in the back of her mind, Chloe registered that several parents had gathered in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. But all of that faded away as Daniel's lips met hers, and she tasted the promise of forever in his kiss. I love you, he murmured against her lips. I love you too, she replied, so much. They might have stayed lost in each other indefinitely, but a small voice piped up from the crowd of children. Does this mean we get to come to a royal wedding? Daniel and Chloe broke apart, laughing. Actually, Daniel said, addressing the class with mock seriousness, Miss Matthews and I were hoping you could help us plan it. After all, you're the ones who helped me propose. The children's excitement reached new heights as they began shouting suggestions for flowers, cake flavors, and whether or not there would be a horse-drawn carriage. As Daniel fielded their enthusiastic questions, Chloe looked down at the ring on her finger. The amber stone caught the light, warm and golden and perfect. It was beautiful, but more than that, it represented everything they'd built together. Not flashy or ostentatious, but genuine and lasting and exactly right. Later that evening, after the children had gone home and Daniel had charmed every parent, teacher and administrator in the building, Chloe and Daniel sat together in the shelter where they'd first worked side by side. They'd come to help serve dinner, as they did every Tuesday. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like the beginning of forever. Any regrets? Chloe asked as they cleaned up the kitchen together, falling into the easy rhythm they'd established over months of volunteering. About what? Daniel asked, drying the large serving pot she'd just washed. About choosing love over business as usual. About the investors you lost, the criticism you faced. Daniel set down the pot and turned to face her fully. Chloe, 6 months ago, I had $3.8 billion and no one who really knew me. Today I have you, a career that actually means something, and more happiness than I ever thought possible. If that's not the best investment I've ever made, I don't know what is. Even when I burn dinner? Chloe teased, remembering her disastrous attempt at cooking for him the week before. Especially when you burn dinner, Daniel said, pulling her into his arms. Although next time, maybe we should order takeout as backup. Chloe laughed, looping her arms around his neck. Deal, but I'm not giving up trying to cook for you. I love that you want to take care of me, Daniel said softly. No one ever wanted to take care of me just because they loved me. Get used to it, Chloe said. You're stuck with me now. Promise? I promise, Chloe said, sealing the words with a kiss that tasted like hope and home and happily ever after. 6 months later, they were married in the garden of the community center, where they'd first fallen in love, working side by side. Chloe wore her grandmother's wedding dress, carefully altered and updated, but carrying the love of generations. Daniel wore a simple black suit and the biggest smile anyone had ever seen on his face. The guest list was unconventional. Business associates sat next to shelter volunteers. Chloe's former students threw flower petals, alongside some of Manhattan's most powerful CEOs, and Mrs. Rodriguez from Chloe's old apartment building gave a reading that brought everyone to tears. But the most meaningful moment came during their vows. When Daniel looked into Chloe's warm brown eyes and spoke words that would be quoted in newspapers and business magazines for years to come. Chloe, you taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or stock prices, but in love given and received. You showed me that the most successful life is one where you lift others up, where you see the best in people, where you choose kindness over profit and connection over acquisition. His voice grew stronger, more certain. You took a man who thought he had everything and showed him he had nothing. Then you gave him everything that actually mattered. You are my heart, my home, my purpose. You are the reason I want to be better, do better, love better. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Chloe's vows were equally powerful. Daniel, you taught me that I was worthy of love, that my dreams mattered, that I deserved to be cherished and supported and believed in. You showed me that true partnership means building each other up, that real love sees past circumstances to the soul underneath. You took a woman who thought she wasn't enough and showed her she was everything. You are my safe harbor, my greatest adventure, my most beautiful dream come true. When they kissed as husband and wife, the cheers that went up could be heard for blocks. The reception lasted until nearly midnight, filled with dancing and laughter and stories that bridged the gap between their two worlds. Daniel's business partners found themselves deep in conversation with shelter volunteers about community outreach programs. Chloe's former students taught Manhattan socialites playground games that had everyone laughing. But the most perfect moment came near the end of the evening, when Daniel and Chloe slipped away from the party to have a few minutes alone. They found themselves back in the kitchen where they'd first worked together, now decorated with white flowers and fairy lights for the wedding. "Do you remember the first time we stood here together?" Daniel asked, pulling Chloe into his arms for a slow dance to music only they could hear. "When you nearly dropped that entire pot of soup?" Chloe teased. "When I realized I was falling in love with you," Daniel corrected. "When I watched you treat every person who came through that line like they mattered, like they deserved respect and kindness, regardless of their circumstances." "That's just how people should be treated," Chloe said. "That's what I love about you," Daniel replied. "To you, kindness isn't extraordinary, it's just who you are. You've spent our entire relationship amazed that I would choose you, when the truth is, I'm amazed that you chose me." "We chose each other," Chloe said, her hands framing his face. "And we keep choosing each other, every single day." "Every single day," Daniel agreed, leaning down to kiss his wife. As they swayed together in the kitchen, where their love had truly begun, both knew they'd found something rare and precious. They'd found a love that transcended circumstances, that survived scrutiny, that grew stronger under pressure. They'd found their forever. And in a world that often seemed to value wealth over worth, success over soul, they'd proven that the most valuable thing of all was the love between two people who saw each other's true hearts and chose to cherish them. The penniless woman's tenderness had indeed shattered the tycoon's barriers, but in return, his unwavering love had shown her that she was worthy of every dream, every hope, every beautiful possibility life had to offer. Together, they had everything that truly mattered. Together, they were home. And so, my beautiful royal story family, we close this chapter on Daniel and Chloe's extraordinary love story, a reminder that the most profound transformations often begin with the simplest acts of kindness. Their journey shows us that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the connections we forge and the love we choose to give. Daniel had billions, but was spiritually empty until Chloe showed him what really mattered. And Chloe, who felt she had nothing to offer, discovered that her capacity for love was the most valuable treasure of all. Have you ever experienced unexpected kindness that changed your life? Or had to choose your heart over others' expectations? Share your stories in the comments below. Your experiences inspire our entire Royal Story family. If this story touched your heart, smash that like button and subscribe for more tales of love conquering all. Ring the notification bell so you never miss when love finds a way. Remember, my beautiful kings and queens, you are worthy of extraordinary love just as you are. Your worth isn't determined by your bank account or what others think. It's inherent and beautiful. This is Sage King reminding you that the most beautiful love stories are yet to be written. Sweet dreams, Royal Story family.